It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the bustling outdoor market. This was one of those rare places where people from all walks of life mingled, wealthy tourists, busy locals, and small business owners hoping to make a day's profit. The market, a tapestry of sights, smells, and sounds, stretched across a cobblestone square lined with food trucks, handmade goods, and colorful produce stands. The air was alive with the chatter of shoppers bargaining with vendors, children tugging their parents toward candy stalls, and street performers drawing small crowds. The scents of roasted chestnuts, spiced cider, and fresh bread mingled in the breeze. Amid this lively atmosphere, most visitors were focused on their own errands or distractions, oblivious to anything outside their immediate interest. But not Barron Trump. Tall and unassuming, he blended into the crowd with remarkable ease for someone of his prominence. Dressed casually in a black coat and jeans, he walked quietly among the stalls, scanning the wares without attracting attention. At just 18, Barron had a presence that was both understated and commanding. His height and composure turned a few heads, but most people were too engrossed in their shopping to notice. Barron had always preferred moments like this, where he could move anonymously and observe the world around him. Having grown up in the public eye, he had learned the value of quiet observation and introspection. His occasional forays into places like this market were not for show. They were an opportunity to connect with the world beyond the confines of his family's influence. As Barron strolled through the market, something caught his eye. Near the edge of the square, where foot traffic was sparse, a vendor stood behind a simple wooden cart. The stall was modest, almost hidden among the more vibrant setups nearby. It displayed an array of handmade items, knitted scarves, carved wooden toys, and jars of preserves. The vendor, an older man with weathered hands and a tired expression, seemed out of place amidst the energy of the market. He glanced up every time someone passed by, his hopeful smile fading each time they walked on without stopping. Barron slowed his pace, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. Unlike the bustling stalls around him, this one was eerily quiet. The vendor's wares looked carefully crafted, each piece a testament to hours of labor. But the lack of interest from the crowd was evident. A small sign hung crookedly from the cart, handwritten in faded ink. Everything handmade with care. The man's face told a story of quiet desperation. His coat was patched at the elbows, his hands slightly trembling as he adjusted the display. Every now and then, he would straighten up, put on a brave smile, and call out to passers-by in a soft voice, "Beautiful handmade scarves, perfect for the cold." But his voice was easily drowned out by the commotion of the market, and his efforts went largely unnoticed. Barron lingered a moment longer, his hands in his pockets as he observed. Something about the vendor struck a chord in him, a mix of dignity and struggle that reminded Barron of the stories he had read about small business owners barely scraping by. While others hurried past, Barron stayed, contemplating his next move. Barron stepped to the side of the cobblestone path, leaning casually against a lamppost. From his vantage point, he had a clear view of the vendor's stall. He watched as the man rearranged his scarves, folding them with meticulous care, even though no one had stopped to admire them. There was a certain sadness in the man's movements, a heaviness that spoke of long days and sleepless nights. As Barron observed, he noticed the subtle details others might miss. The vendor's fingernails were chipped and rough, evidence of manual labor. His shoes, worn and scuffed, looked as though they had walked countless miles. And yet, the man's posture remained straight, his gaze steady. Despite his struggles, he carried himself with a quiet pride that Barron couldn't ignore. The crowd ebbed and flowed around the stall, but no one paused. Some glanced at the display briefly before moving on. Others walked by without even noticing. Barron wondered how many days the vendor had spent like this, waiting for someone to stop and take interest in his work. He imagined the effort that went into creating each item, the hours spent knitting scarves, carving toys, and carefully preserving fruit. And yet, here the man stood, his hard work overlooked by the very people it was meant to serve. Barron's thoughts drifted to the man's story. What had brought him to this point? Was he supporting a family, trying to make ends meet after losing a steady job? Or was This stall all he had, his only lifeline in an increasingly indifferent world. The questions weighed on Barron as he continued to observe. What struck him most was the vendor's resilience. Despite the lack of customers, the man didn't complain or show frustration. Instead, he continued to call out softly, his voice filled with a kind of quiet determination. It was a resilience that resonated deeply with Barron, who had seen firsthand the struggles of people trying to carve out a living against overwhelming odds. After a while, Barron took a step forward, weaving through the crowd as he made his way toward the stall. He had decided what he would do. Barron approached the vendor's stall with a calm demeanor, his presence unnoticed by most of the bustling crowd. The vendor, however, looked up immediately, startled but hopeful. Barron offered a polite smile as he stopped in front of the display. "Good afternoon," Barron said, his voice warm but measured. "You've got some beautiful work here." The vendor's face lit up, his tired eyes brightening at the compliment. "Thank you, young man," he replied, his voice tinged with gratitude. "Everything here is handmade. Please take a look." Barron began examining the items carefully, picking up a scarf and running his fingers over the soft knit. He asked thoughtful questions about the craftsmanship, the materials used, and the time it took to create each piece. The vendor, clearly appreciative of the genuine interest, spoke with pride about his work, his voice growing more animated with each answer. After a few minutes, Barron turned to the vendor with a thoughtful expression. "I'll take everything," he said simply. The vendor blinked, momentarily stunned. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "I'd like to buy everything you have here," Barron repeated, gesturing to the entire display. "Scarves, toys, preserves, everything." The vendor's jaw dropped. "All of it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, all of it," Barron confirmed with a nod. "And don't worry about packing it all right now. I'll arrange to have it picked up later." For a moment, the vendor was speechless. His hands trembled as he tried to process the words. This will make a world of difference for me," he finally said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me," Barron replied softly. "Your work deserves to be seen and appreciated. I'm just glad I could help." Barron reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet, paying the full amount without hesitation. The vendor tried to offer a discount, but Barron insisted on paying the listed price for every item. As the transaction concluded, Barron leaned in slightly and said, "I'd like these to go to people who need them most. Would you be willing to help me donate them to local shelters or schools?" The vendor nodded fervently, tears welling in his eyes. "Absolutely," he said. "I know exactly where they can go." The two exchanged contact information, and Barron made arrangements for the goods to be picked up later that day. Before leaving, Barron shook the vendor's hand firmly, looking him in the eye. "You've done good work," he said. "Keep at it. And if you ever need help, don't hesitate to reach out." The vendor watched as Barron disappeared into the crowd, still reeling from what had just happened. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of hope, not just for himself, but for the kindness that still existed in the world. As the realization of what had just happened sank in, the vendor's hands began to tremble. He stared at the now empty space on his cart, his neatly arranged inventory gone, replaced by a sense of relief so profound it left him momentarily speechless. His work, hours, days, perhaps weeks of effort, had not only been recognized but valued in a way he hadn't dared to dream. He wiped his hands on his worn coat and turned to Barron, his voice breaking. I don't know what to say. This will change everything for me." Barron, who had stayed long enough to ensure all the details of the purchase and donation were finalized, offered a small, reassuring smile. "There's no need to say anything," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You've worked hard, and you deserve this." But for the vendor, gratitude demanded expression. His voice, thick with emotion, grew louder as he spoke. "I've been doing this for years, trying to make an honest living. There were times I thought about giving up, times I wondered if anyone even cared about what I was doing. And then you come along, out of nowhere, and show me that maybe, just maybe, I was right to keep going." He paused, running his hand over his face to brush away the tears that had started to form. The crowd, previously unaware of the interaction, began to notice. A few people stopped to watch, curiosity mingling with admiration as they pieced together what had happened. "You don't know what this means to me," the vendor continued, his voice trembling. "This money, it'll help me pay off debts, restock my supplies, and even keep the lights on at home. My wife and I, we've been struggling for so long, and now," he trailed off, overcome by emotion. Barron placed a hand on the vendor's shoulder, a gesture that was simple but spoke volumes. "Sometimes all we need is a little help to keep going," he said. "I'm glad I could be that for you today." The vendor nodded, swallowing hard as he tried to regain his composure. He reached out to shake Barron's hand, gripping it tightly. "You've done more than just buy my goods," he said. "You've given me hope." As Barron turned to leave, the vendor called out one final time. "Wait, please, tell me your name." Barron paused for a moment, glancing back with a faint smile. "It's Barron," he said simply, before disappearing into the crowd. While Barron had no intention of drawing attention to himself, his quiet act of kindness had not gone unnoticed. A small group of onlookers had witnessed the exchange, their curiosity piqued by the vendor's emotional reaction and the obvious scale of the purchase. Among them was a young woman holding a phone who had captured a portion of the interaction on video. She posted the clip on social media later that evening, accompanied by a heartfelt caption. "Today, I saw something incredible at the market. A young man, humble, quiet, and kind, bought out an entire struggling vendor's inventory. The vendor was in tears, and it was clear this act of generosity meant everything to him. I found out later the man's name was Barron Trump. Whatever your thoughts about his family, this moment was pure humanity. Kindness like this reminds us there's good in the world." The post quickly went viral, spreading across platforms like wildfire. Within hours, it had been shared by thousands, with hashtags like #BarronTrumpKindness, #VendorHope, and #Humanity in action trending worldwide. People responded with a mix of awe and admiration. This is what the world needs more of: quiet, genuine acts of kindness. Barron Trump could have just walked by like everyone else, but he stopped and made a difference. Respect. It doesn't matter who you are. Compassion is always powerful. Thank you, Barron, for reminding us of that. The media quickly picked up the story, with local news outlets running headlines such as "Barron Trump's unexpected act of generosity at local market goes viral." "Quiet kindness, Barron Trump's compassionate gesture inspires the nation." National outlets soon joined in, dissecting the moment and its impact. Talk shows, opinion pieces, and social media influencers all weighed in, praising the simplicity and sincerity of Barron's actions. "What struck me most about this story," said one television commentator, "is how unassuming it was. This wasn't a grand gesture orchestrated for cameras. It was a genuine moment of compassion, noticed only because others happened to be watching. It's rare to see this kind of humility, especially from someone who grew up in such a high-profile family." But as with anything involving the Trump name, the story also sparked debate. Skeptics questioned whether the gesture was orchestrated, pointing to the viral nature of the video as evidence of a calculated move. Supporters, however, were quick to push back, arguing that Barron's modest demeanor and lack of public statements about the event proved its authenticity. Regardless of the differing opinions, one thing was clear: the story had struck a chord. Across the country, people began sharing their own stories of helping those in need, inspired by Barron's example. At the market, the vendor became something of a local celebrity. People who had seen the video flocked to his stall, eager to support his business and hear his story firsthand. The once quiet vendor now found himself at the center of attention, but he handled it with grace, always emphasizing the larger message of the encounter. "This isn't about me," he told a reporter who visited his stall days later. "It's about the kindness of a young man who didn't have to stop, but did. And it's about all the people out there who are struggling, just like I was. If this story inspires others to help, then something truly amazing has come out of it." The vendor's words were echoed in countless social media posts and community discussions. Stories began to emerge of people buying extra goods from struggling vendors, donating to local shelters, and simply paying closer attention to those in need. As the story continued to circulate, Barron remained quiet about the incident. He neither confirmed nor denied his involvement when approached by the media, choosing instead to let the act speak for itself. For him, the gesture had never been about recognition. It had been about doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. As the story of Barron Trump's act of kindness gained traction, the media quickly latched onto it, turning a quiet market encounter into a national conversation. News outlets from local papers to major networks ran segments analyzing the gesture, with headlines varying in tone. Barron Trump's quiet generosity sparks a movement for small businesses. The power of a simple gesture. Barron Trump supports struggling vendor. Critics question the timing of Barron Trump's viral moment. The footage of the encounter taken by a bystander's phone became the centerpiece of many discussions. Clips showing Barron handing the vendor money, nodding humbly as the man expressed gratitude, and walking away without any fanfare left a lasting impression. Talk show hosts and commentators dissected the moment, with some praising Barron for his humility and others speculating about the motivations behind the gesture. One prominent political commentator remarked, "What we're seeing here is a moment of pure humanity. Whether you agree with his family's politics or not, Barron's actions show a young man stepping outside of the shadow of his last name and making a difference. It's refreshing to see someone with so much privilege use it for good without seeking attention." However, not everyone viewed the event through such a generous lens. Skeptics suggested that the story's viral nature might have been orchestrated, citing the swift spread of the video and its subsequent media coverage. Social media users debated whether the act was entirely spontaneous or part of a calculated effort to reshape public perception of the Trump family. Sure, it's a nice story, but let's not ignore how perfectly timed this is for PR. Even if it was planned, who cares? The vendor benefited, and that's what matters. We should focus less on motives and more on outcomes. This inspired me to support my local vendors today. Despite the mixed opinions, one fact was undeniable. Barron's gesture had ignited a wave of empathy and action. Stories began emerging from across the country of individuals helping struggling vendors, donating to small businesses, and supporting local artisans in their communities. The ripple effect of one moment of kindness was spreading far beyond the market where it had begun. As the story gained momentum, Barron Trump's name became a trending topic across social media and news platforms. Reporters attempted to reach out for a statement, but Barron remained silent, avoiding interviews and public appearances related to the incident. For someone who had grown up in the spotlight, Barron's reluctance to engage with the media was characteristic. He had long preferred to stay out of the public eye, valuing privacy and authenticity over attention. To those who knew him, his refusal to capitalize on the moment only reinforced the sincerity of his actions. In a rare public comment made through a brief statement, Barron addressed the overwhelming response to the story. His words were simple yet profound. Helping someone in need isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right. I hope this story inspires others to look around and notice the people who could use a helping hand. Small gestures can make a big difference. The statement resonated deeply with people who had been following the story. Many praised Barron for his humility, contrasting it with the often performative nature of public gestures in the social media age. His focus on the vendor and the broader message, rather than his own involvement, further endeared him to supporters. The story took on a life of its own, evolving into a larger discussion about how individuals, regardless of their background or resources, could make meaningful contributions to their communities. Barron's act had become a symbol of quiet, impactful generosity, an antidote to the divisiveness that often dominated headlines. For the vendor, whose stall had been on the verge of collapse, Barron's act of kindness marked a turning point. With the financial boost from selling his entire inventory, he was able to pay off overdue bills, restock his supplies, and secure the stability he had been struggling to achieve for months. In interviews with local news outlets, the vendor shared how much the gesture had meant to him and his family. "I didn't think anyone noticed me that day," he admitted. "It felt like I was invisible, like all my hard work was for nothing. But then Barron showed up, and in just a few minutes, everything changed." The vendor used part of the money to invest in his business, upgrading his cart and expanding his product line to include more items that appealed to a wider audience. The rest went toward rent, groceries, and medical expenses for his wife, who had been battling health issues. But beyond the financial impact, it was the emotional lift that had the most profound effect. That one act of kindness reminded me that people do care, the vendor said. It gave me the courage to keep going, to believe in myself and my work again. As the story spread, the vendor's stall became a local attraction. Customers flocked to buy his goods, eager to support someone whose story had touched so many hearts. He began receiving bulk orders from local businesses and community organizations, ensuring that he would never again face the kind of uncertainty that had plagued him before Barron's visit. The vendor also found himself in a new role as an advocate for small businesses and struggling artisans. He spoke at community events, sharing his story and encouraging others to support their local vendors. Every dollar spent at a stall like mine, he said, is a vote of confidence in someone's hard work and dreams. The impact of Barron's gesture extended far beyond the vendor and his stall. The story inspired a wave of support for small businesses, local vendors, and artisans in communities across the country. Social media campaigns encouraged people to shop small, highlighting the importance of supporting independent sellers who often struggled to compete with larger corporations. In Barron's hometown, a grassroots movement emerged to create more opportunities for struggling vendors. Local governments and nonprofits collaborated to establish new marketplaces with reduced fees, ensuring that vendors like the man Barron helped could thrive. One initiative, inspired directly by Barron's story, was the creation of a kindness fund supported by community donations. The fund provided financial assistance to small business owners facing unexpected challenges, from medical bills to equipment repairs. The program became a model for other cities, spreading the message that communities could come together to lift up their most vulnerable members. The ripple effects weren't just economic, they were cultural. The story encouraged people to slow down, pay attention, and recognize the humanity in those around them. Acts of kindness, both big and small, began to multiply, creating a sense of unity and compassion that had been missing in many communities. Years later, the story of Barron Trump's quiet act of kindness remained a powerful reminder of the impact one person could have. The vendor's life had been transformed, his business thriving, and his family secure. The community initiatives inspired by the event continued to grow, helping countless others find stability and hope. For Barron, the legacy of that day wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about the principle that had guided his actions, noticing those who are often overlooked and extending a hand when it's needed most. In interviews and public appearances over the years, Barron occasionally reflected on the moment. What I did that day wasn't extraordinary, he would say. Anyone can do it. The real extraordinary thing is the ripple effect, how one small gesture can inspire so many others to act. The story became a teaching tool in schools and community organizations, used to illustrate the power of empathy, generosity, and paying attention. It reminded people that change didn't always require grand gestures or massive resources. Sometimes it started with something as simple as noticing someone who needed help. As the years passed, the story of Barron and the vendor became a symbol of hope and humanity, proving that even in a fast-paced, often indifferent world, acts of kindness could create lasting impact.